Hi class, it's Bill Berry picking up with the last video in our first topic in this week's series, and that is we're still talking about data. We gave some background, talked about some key things that we needed to understand, and then we started in with data, and we finished in the last video talking about the insert command, which lets us add data to an existing table. Next, we're going to pick up with another command, and that's the one that lets us do some editing, right? When we need to change data that exists there, we need to use a different command. So insert is great for adding data. You need to change it, you need another one. So let's jump right down there. And that is that we're going to work now with the update command. Now the syntax for this is going to be a lot easier because when you're inserting data, you're responsible usually for entering multiple columns worth of data. And there's not a lot of way around that, right? Except for default columns, null columns, things like that. You pretty much have to present all the data. But with update and with delete, the syntax is going to be much simpler because there's just less to worry about, right? We can pinpoint things with update, and with delete, we're just deleting the whole row anyway. So let's jump in and look at the syntax for update and then make sure we understand how that ties in, because now we have a new problem, and that is making sure that we don't damage the database. So let's look at that. The first idea is if you want to change some data, use update. But you have to use the where clause, because if you don't, it's going to update all rows. Right? Let that sink in a minute. If you issue a bad update command, you can affect every single row in that table. You could have 1,000,000 rows in a table, you're going to update 1,000,000 rows. So it's essential that we include a where clause unless we really know what we're doing. And of course, MySQL Safe Update Mode knows that we probably don't at this point. So it'll keep us from doing that mass destruction by making sure that we use a primary key. Right? So that's a useful thing for us to know. So how do we use update? Well, the syntax is you say update and then you give the name of the table. Then you say set, right, the keyword set. You say which columns data you want to set, and then you put an equal sign, and then you say what data to set it to, right? What's the expression, or what's the, what's the data that you want to put there? And you can do math, and as you could with any expression. But so basically, it's just set this column and equals that value. And then you can do more than one. If you need to update the same row with more than one update, you can put a comma, and then you can put more expressions. That needs to be fixed. And then, of course, you can continue. You can do multiple columns of changes, right? If you want to change multiple cells, you can do it all in one set. Then, last but not least, you have to say where and a filter condition, right? Because you want to pinpoint. Again, if you don't say where, it's going to affect every single row. It's unusual that you do that, but sometimes it may happen. Generally, we put where, and of course, because of Safe Update Mode, generally we're going to need to make sure we include a primary key in that. So now let's look at our sample, our pet adoption, and see if we can write that command successfully. So again, let's go grab our handy dandy notepad, and we're going to work on an update down here. Okay, so here's our pet table, here's our EER, here's the syntax for the update command. We noticed when we look back on it that we had listed Duke as having arrived with us on 10/31, but that was actually not correct. It was supposed to be November 1st. So let's fix that, and let's keep in mind SQL's Safe Update Mode. So let's write it correctly and then talk about some ways that we could maybe be a little bit careless here. So first, we know we need the word update and we need the name of the table. So update pet, great. Then we need the word set. Which column do we want to change? Well, in this case, it is the pet date arrived column, right? What data do we want to set in that? That needs to be 2017-11-01, right? Now, if we stopped there, and if we didn't have MySQL Safe Update Mode, what would happen? Every single pet in the table would have their pet arrive date overwritten with that value. Ah, not good, right? That is not what we would want. So in this case, we must immediately proceed to where and then put a filter condition. Because of Safe Update Mode, we really only have one choice, right? We've got to look up Duke's pet ID and provide it here, right? That's the option. So that's a syntactically correct, and we are obeying MySQL Safe Update Mode, right? So that's perfect. But let's look at some things that maybe would be a little bit more dangerous. Even if we didn't have Safe Update Mode on, if we turned it off, what if we did this? Pet name equals Duke. Okay. Well, that seems reasonable at first glance, and maybe because we know we only have this tiny bit of sample data, that seems completely reasonable. But do you really think that you're never going to see in the history of the time this database is going to be used another pet named Duke or Fluffy or Lucky or Rex or whatever the common names are for these dogs? Of course you're going to see another one. So this is a dangerous command. Even with Safe Update Mode off, even though it would succeed, and today it might work correctly, if you get over time, you're going to see that this is incorrect. So really you shouldn't do this anyway, right? You should put it back to the way it was, which is you go and make sure that you look up and find the proper pet ID of 3 for Duke. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. Now, the other way to do it, you could write a more intricate command where you did an idea like a subquery where you went and looked for the Duke row. But again, you could have more than one Duke. So really, this is the way that you need to do it. And there's not a lot of options, right? Notice we only want to change the pet date arrived. If there was some other data over here that we wanted to change at the same time, we could put a comma, right? Like if we had typed his name wrong, we could say pet name equals, and then we could put, maybe it wasn't Duke, maybe it was supposed to be Duchess, I don't know. So you could certainly do more changes on the same row at the same time if you'd like, but use the primary key so that you don't make any mistakes on pointing to the wrong data, right? Does that make sense? So that's how insert works, right? You can target just the row that you want. You should target the row you want, and you can target just the cell of data that you want to replace. Great, right? That works perfectly well. All right. Now let's go on, and here's the example of that. And then we did another example of, we can do another example where we do multiple rows, right? So if you wanted to do multiple rows, just remember if you don't have a where clause, it will affect everything. So be careful, right? Give a where condition. Even if you have Safe Update Mode off, this will succeed, but it affects every single row in the table. So make sure you do it right, and make sure that you have a backup of that data. If you're worried about making a bunch of serious changes, you might want to have a backup just to make sure. All right, so you can certainly do that. Now, the next and last one in the sort of data manipulation world that we're going to talk about is the delete command. And the delete command lets you get rid of data, and it has the easiest syntax of any of these that we're going to look at today. If you need to get rid of data, you just use the delete command and tell it what table. But again, like the update command, if you have no where clause, it's going to affect every single row in the table. So this is another dangerous kind of command. This is a weapon of mass destruction kind of command. You got to be careful. And again, MySQL Safe Update Mode is going to keep those training wheels on, so you really should use a PK. You'll have to use a primary key in your where clause if you want it to succeed with Safe Update Mode on. Right? So this is the basic syntax, right? Delete from table name, and then make sure you do a where condition. Right? It's very straightforward. Again, there's no undo. There's no Control Z. There's no undo. If you do this at work and delete data you didn't mean to, then you're running to find the backup people to see when the last backup was made, and hopefully it was fairly recently and you didn't lose some data, because that's a bad thing to do. But again, the good news is they're not going to give you permission to delete stuff anyway when you start. You'll have to know what you're doing before you have any kind of power like this. So let's jump to our pet adoption example, and let's see if we can write a command that goes with that. And let's say that we're just going to want to add a sample customer, and then we want to delete that customer just to prove that we can. So let's write that command. Delete from the name of the table is customer. If we were to stop there, SQL Safe Update Mode is not going to let us do it. So we need to continue. Right, where, and what's the filter condition? We've got to use a primary key, where cust ID equals, okay, we're not ready to do the delete because we need to add, oops. So let's say we're going to delete number 4, but we better have a customer 4, so let's do that quickly. Insert customer, and then we'll just do the values part, and we'll do customer number 4, make up a name, John Jones, customer phone, customer balance, All right, so there's our insert command, right? We could run that to insert customer number 4, John Jones. And then we could turn around and delete John Jones by using delete from customer where cust ID equals 4. Right? Of course, this could be default, but here's a great example of this. If we say default here, now we have to go do a select to make sure that John Jones is in fact 4, right? To make sure that it was added at the place that we thought. So that's an interesting thing. If we're writing a script, it's easier to have that as reference so that we know, oh yeah, that was 4. I know for sure I can use 4 here. Right? As long as you didn't already have a 4, that would have been a problem. All right, so that's how you use the delete command. It's really straightforward, right? So we're going to insert that customer and then prove that we can delete it. All right, delete that customer. Great. Any questions about that? You can certainly email or remind me in class and we can certainly talk about it. But deleting is pretty straightforward. Just make sure that you put the where condition. Okay. Seemed like something else I wanted to talk about. Yeah, I guess that kind of covers it. All right, so there's an example of the insertion. There's the example of the deletion. Oh, I know what it was. What happens to the auto increment? Let's say that you've inserted customer 4 and then you've deleted customer 4 using this kind of command here, right? What happens to the auto increment value? If you insert another customer, what do you get? May not be exactly what you might expect. You might think that maybe 4 would be reused, but it turns out no. SQL's auto increment is a really basic, really simple command, a simple idea, and it doesn't do anything fancy. It will not go back and reuse 4. It had remembered that 4 was the last one that it used, and delete does not update anything in its memory about what number it's on next. So the next customer that's going to be added here is going to be number 5, not number 4. That also kind of makes sense that if you once had a customer numbered 4, maybe you shouldn't have one, right? Maybe you want to leave that space empty so that you know that there was a deletion. So you can think of it either way, but the command will certainly delete will not fix up auto increment. The next customer is certainly going to be number 5. All right, so last couple things to talk about here is really just some references. So if you want to know more about referential integrity, particularly this idea of declarative referential integrity, really we're kind of going to get into it anyway when we get into the idea of how to create a table from scratch, how to declare all the columns, how to declare the foreign keys. We're going to sort of see that, but this is some specific talks talking about referential integrity and also maybe a little bit of a nod to the past in terms of how we used to do it, right? In older days when there wasn't this idea of DRI, how did we do it then? So if you just want a little history lesson, then follow these links. Otherwise, again, we'll kind of talk about it again soon anyway when we create tables. So that brings us to the end of the section on how you work with data. We talked about the insert command, the update command, and the delete command. All let you work with the data in a table. The next topic is going to be a specific overview of data types. So exactly how do the data types work and what's the quirks in SQL. That'll be the next topic, but let's stop the video at this point because it's long enough. Thanks for watching and hope to catch you in another video.